Experiment 11. I have a box with a big 11 on it. Intend to have an image of the item in the box put on a screen or monitor in front of you. Remember what you see. Now put that result aside, move your vision to the box, and with no expectations of what you see, look through the box to view the object. Now put that result aside, get a sense of the feel for the utility of the object. What does it do? What's its use and function? See it in its natural environment. Without losing your altered state, open your eyes and write down or draw what you saw each time. Then immediately return to float in the void. Experiment 12. This is our last experiment. I have left an object lying in the middle of my bed in my home in Alabama. Take a look and see what it is. Then remember what you see. Now put that result aside. Next, get a sense or feel for the utility of the object. What does it do? Look at it being used. See its function. See it in its natural environment. Without losing your altered state, open your eyes and write down or draw what you saw. Then immediately return to float in the void. And finally, I will give you a few minutes to remote view or diagnose and heal a subject of your choice. Open your eyes and let the experience go. Slowly and gradually re-embrace the physical world. After you're fully returned, write down any notes or any questions that might have come up, any comments. And we're done with these exercises. Okay, we ready for the truth of what happened here? Experiment 6 was Anna H. Anna H had level 2 lymphatic cancer, left side over and above the clavicle. Anna H noticed first nodules about 1 year ago. This is the one where you did the time, forward and backward. She noticed them about a year ago. That means they started to form before that. Went to a doctor in June when she noticed 3 nodules and was diagnosed with level 2 lymphatic cancer in July. She's had chemotherapy since then. Okay, so this is where you went back and forth in time, tried to heal at the beginning, then looked at a prognosis for the future, and hopefully you were looking at the source of the cancer and not just the problems in her body due to the chemotherapy that she's had. Okay. So we did a few things new there. We went forward and backward, and we did a prognosis. And we used a graphical output. So there's a bunch of new skills we just used there. Okay, the next one was experiment 7. That was Kelly X. Kelly X had breast cancer. I don't know if it was right, left, or both, but it was breast cancer. Okay, now we did a few new things there as well. We started using tools, tongs, scalpels, jars, the sun. See, these are a bunch of metaphors and tools that we have that have meaning for us. Notice that when we use these tools, like the scalpel and the tongs and so on, we then threw them in a jar, tossed the jar in the sun. Why would we bother to do that? Okay. The reason we bother to do that is because most of us have beliefs about disease. We have these beliefs that if we were to remove the diseased part, the black part, and just left it laying around, somebody might run into it. It might be us. Somebody might catch the disease. We kind of have to clean up after ourselves, right? Be neat and tidy, clean everything up, put the tools away at the end. Because otherwise, if we have that belief, which most of us have, because that's the way disease works here, right? If you have something diseased, particularly if the disease is a catching disease, which of course you didn't know at that time, you wouldn't know if you were just doing it. And you had that belief that you might run into this later, that could cause a problem for you. You could think, oh, you know, if I bump into this, I'm taking out this disease stuff and just laying it around, and you start to worry or have fear that you might run into it sometime, or you might get it on you, or you might not use your gloves. Okay, you touched it, not with the tongs, but with your hands. That could lead to a fear, which could lead to actually you getting the disease. In other words, you would make your fears come true. So we're neat, and we use gloves, and we use tongs, and we destroy everything just so we don't trap ourselves with our fear into catching the disease. All right, that was Kelly X. Okay, that was 7. Number 8. And also we used a wet vac and, flamethrower or, torch, anything that you want. Any of these things are just make-up metaphors that suit you. I just made some up and threw them in there just so you'd get the idea that you can use any kind of metaphor you want to use. You can make up ones that suit you best. Let's see, we had an On Your Own after that. That On Your Own was Louisa G., and she has hypothyroid problem. So the hypothyroid, of course, would be where the thyroid gland is, and her symptoms, of course, she was very tired, a lot of lethargy. There's often weight loss. There's other things that go with that, but all that would have been systemic. The hypothyroid was the problem. The other On Your Own effort was Carlos C. Carlos C. had Bell's palsy, and it left Carlos with a hearing loss in a right ear. So you should have seen something at the head on one side. Experiment 8. This is where we looked at the health body, then the emotional body, and then the spiritual body. Okay, these bodies are what we call auras, right? This is the same thing as an aura. We just call it an aura when we imagine the output as this color visual picture around the person's body. Then we say that's an aura, but it's just gathering this information about them and displaying it in a way that we like. Okay, now Joseph Z just happens to be, or not Joseph, Jose C just happens to be Jose Luis Rodriguez Zapatero, Spanish president of the government. Now, I don't know what his health, emotional, and spiritual body looks like, but now I guess you do. You should know him better than I as to whether what you saw fits. That was a surprise, wasn't it? All right, number 9. Number 9. Let's take a look and see what number 9 was. A pair of pliers. And of course, this dangerous weapon, which is about 4 inches from tip to end, was confiscated from my box as I passed through the airport security. Probably more dangerous than a span or crescent wrench, right? More span or more dangerous than a wrench, no doubt. But terrible terrorist tool. All right, then that was 9. You could have seen that as an X. Maybe even this part of the handle would have looked like a C. It's hard to say exactly what you might have made of that. Could have been a clock again, just because you have things sticking out like hands of a clock. Next was experiment 10. And where was number 10? Taj Mahal, Agra, India. So if you got a bunch of straight lines up in the air, which would have been towers, that would have been good. A box with some straight lines around them, that would have been excellent. Now, number 11. Number 11 was, and fortunately, This was not seen as a dangerous weapon, so I was able to keep it. I'm not sure why that wasn't a dangerous weapon. It looks at least as dangerous to me as a wrench, but somehow this passed. And lastly, what is lying in the middle of my bed right now? Don't you find it interesting that you can look into my bedroom and see what's going on in my bed? Okay, just a few additional comments. Since you've done this a second time, hopefully you were able to eliminate the expectations and beliefs and analysis a little better. The rest of it was the same. No need to repeat that. When you start healing from the past, occasionally, depending on the disease, that can be very powerful process. Healing it before it starts. Graphical output, you had a chance to do that. Did that work out for anybody? Did you get the graphical output and see the graphs? Anybody actually have success with seeing the graph lines? Yeah, one, sort of. Not a lot of success. See, that's just a different thing. That's not something we usually do, right? We don't get graphical outputs very often, but if you work with it, you can see that is a good way to do prognosis, how the health of somebody is going to change in the future. We intuitively let the light pick its own colors. We didn't try to say what the colors were. Did anybody get different colors between the short-term and long-term best benefit? Did you have colors change? Yeah, a few people. Tongue, gloves, containers, cleanup, we mentioned that. Lasers, blowtorch, vacuum, scalpels, filters, suns. The sun is a very powerful metaphor. It's bright. It's whatever, 8,000 degrees or 10,000 degrees. It's immensely hot. It's a nuclear reaction going on. It melts, burns, and disassociates everything. So it's a powerful tool for getting rid of things, for putting energy in people's systems. You can make little suns and put them over black spots if you want. Be creative. Come up with tools that work for you. Use your intuition. All right. Was it real? It's hard to tell, but the only way to know for sure whether it was real is whether or not you practice enough to get enough data and enough statistics that you can tell whether you're having an effect. If you really were into it, you were 100% engaged, your mind wasn't flying around, I'd say there's a very high probability that what you saw and what you got was real. But that's a difficult thing to do sometimes. Let's see. We already talked about that for maximum use. Revisit it several times a day. Keep it in the back of your mind. And don't push on people when you're healing them. All right, that brings us to the end. This is always my ending slide. This has to be your question now. Does this guy know what he's talking about, or does he just think he knows? Are his experiences real, or does he just think they're real? Unless you have some experience with the larger consciousness system, you have to have this question. You need to be skeptical. You need to find out for yourself. A lot of these concepts are not new. People have been using their minds to heal for thousands of years. You can read the Bhagavad Gita and find similar kinds of things that go back 4,000 years. Similar ideas have been in our culture and other cultures since prehistoric times. What's different here is that it's placed in reach of a left brain mind. It's got logical process, it's science, and it's got a language of a precise language, and it explains exactly how these things happen, and in the process explains a lot of good science too. So those are the things you perhaps should consider. But the thing that's most important from my point of view that you can take away from this is a desire, some spark of interest to pursue this, study, learn, and by all means experiment, experiment, experiment. Do it. And in months and in a couple of years, you'll be good at it. You'll understand it. It'll be your truth because it'll be your experience. So that is, I think, the key of these 2 days, is that you come out with a structure that you can use to understand why it happens the way it does, what's going on, that you can let go of perhaps rituals and beliefs and processes that are unnecessary and limiting, and that you can find your own truth through these kinds of experiments. I do healing and remote viewing because it's easy. These are the easiest things for you to do with your mind, to collect evidence that then you can convince yourself that you're having a real effect. Okay, so I don't want you to believe, what I say. I want you to find out if what I say is true. I don't want you to disbelieve what I say. That's the same as belief. It won't take you anyplace important. Find out for yourself if it's true. This is how you grow. Growth is your purpose, your mission, your responsibility. Let my big toe be the catalyst for your big toe. In the end, that is more the purpose than just telling you what reality is all about. Thank you. Amen. Thank you. Good. Now we have all the rest of the time. It's only about 1500, so we have all the rest of the time until we have to go home to have questions. So we've got hours and hours of questions. You'll finally be able to get your questions answered.
You mentioned that the data in the ultimate consciousness is sometimes becomes fragmented after death, but then the consciousness can reappear in a different virtual form. Does that data then reassimilate itself as that original consciousness and then learn from there, or are the bits of data all separated, and when you actually, whether the next virtual being comes back into the reality, into the virtual reality, is it a similar type of structure? Does that make sense? Okay. You, as a consciousness, you build up data. You're a stream of data, and it stays as a group while you're in reality, in virtual reality. And then when you die, that data is still in the database, and eventually that it revisits the virtual reality world again. That data is still in the database, and a separate consciousness takes on that data. Is that a data in a group, or is it just part of that database in a totally separate consciousness?
That data, the data group, if you will, some people might call it a higher self, an oversoul, or something like that. That's kind of the data group, and that would be a collection of past lives or experience packets, as I say. And all of that is kind of defined as let's say that's a file. Okay, that's a file. And as you as a free will awareness unit, you come and you interact here. You're feeding data back to that file. That file's being accumulating your experience all the time. So then when you die here, well, you stop feeding data back to it, right? But it has all your data. So you cease to be, in a sense, but all that you were and everything about you is back in that data file, which is the oversoul, higher self, individuated unit of consciousness. We got all these different metaphors that we use. Then it's time to reincarnate again. And let's say this time, what your individuated unit of consciousness wants to do is, be a starving child in Biafra, So then you have that incarnation, and you have that experience. That experience feeds back up to the oversoul, and then it dies. You want to have another incarnation, and you have an incarnation at a different time and place, and different story, different personage, different physical body, and again it starts, and so it just keeps accumulating in that file. That's when you talk about your consciousness with kind of a capital U, your consciousness, that's the bigger file. Okay, and then there's your consciousness, which is your free will awareness unit. So that's why we have this little C's and big C's in here. There's your consciousness, a free will awareness unit, which is just your fragment of that consciousness that's participating here in this virtual reality now. You see, it's that sort of thing. It's not impossible for that individuated unit of consciousness to have 2 or maybe 3 incarnations here now. And oftentimes they know each other. Not always. Sometimes the reason for them to know each other is that there may be a special learning that could take place because a person has to deal with their own personality. You see? So if it's mother and daughter, and they're right out of the same oversoul, I keep changing the words, right? Oversoul, unit of consciousness, higher self, because they're all really the same. So if that would be a really helpful thing, where you have to deal with yourself in that way, then that may happen. It's very rare that it would be, let's say you have 2 incarnations, one of them here and one of them in China. What would be the point in that? They're not going to interact. You're just parallel processing now. Parallel processing is not particularly useful. Why wouldn't we incarnate 100, right, and get done quicker? It doesn't work that way. Learning is a serial process. You build on what you know now, to what you know the next time. So having a whole lot out at the same level all doesn't make sense. It's a cumulative serial process. So you generally do one at a time, or sometimes 1 or 2. You might even have a grandmother or a mother and a daughter, and they all may be out of the same, out of the same oversoul, just to give them that experience of seeing themselves from a different perspective. So that's, that happens sometimes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it actually does, and it leads on to the second question, which I think you may have just answered, which was about carrying through problems in the data stream that have, say you've had a physical problem to, say, the brain, and that causes a problem in the data stream that limits your physical ability within the virtual reality stream. You don't necessarily carry that through to the next virtual reality.
No, not at all. You don't carry that through. That's just a condition here for learning in this reality frame. You don't take that with you.
And you start afresh.
You start afresh. Yeah, when you get a stroke here, that doesn't damage your consciousness. That just restrains or constricts. Constrains is probably the right word. It just constrains the ability of you to function here in this reality frame. It's strictly local. Doesn't carry on.
So my question is about why all of us see the same thing in this reality. Why, when we look at the curtain, we all see the curtain and not something else? So is there something, if it's just a data stream, and you would expect us when we go and look at the box or in your bed, which was weird. You expect us to see the same thing, right? So is there something in the sort of behind the nature of those data or of those information that makes us see the same thing?
You all will get similar. If you all ask to see the data of what's lying in the middle of my bed, then you should all get data stream that looks like a hammer. But now you don't all interpret the data the same way. You're not all of the same level of stillness and consciousness quality and focus, and all these things are individual. Some of you will have thoughts going on, some of you will be drifting around. So everybody doesn't get the same, and then if you did get the same data, everybody wouldn't interpret it the same. It wouldn't necessarily make the same interpretation, because what you get is kind of a mental picture. It may not be a picture like a photograph, but you get a sense, particularly ladies who don't do pictures so much as they get feelings. You get the feeling of a hammer. It feels like a hammer, sort of thing. Well, you know, what's a hammer feel like? If you're a carpenter, you might have a real good feel for what a hammer felt like, but if not, what does a hammer feel like to you? It's a little fuzzy. So you maybe get different things. But we tend to get similar things because we're all basically getting the same data. If we're all accessing the database accurately, we should be getting roughly.
So there is sort of a property to those information, to that data.
Sure, yeah, it's real data. It's supposedly, you're asking the database what's there, and it ought to be giving you that answer of what's there. Now, what you do with that and how clearly you receive it and how clearly you're able to transfer that reception to language and to a picture is different with everybody. But you should all get a description of what's there if you are connected to that database.
Okay, and just one more question. How much do you think your background, your first job, your second job, risk analysis, you know, you were working with some statistics and probabilities, influence the fact that now you see reality as probabilistic and statistical?
Question, you know, there's kind of the joke in my business that, you know, if you're a hammer, you see everything as a nail, right? No doubt. Now, that's kind of a chicken and egg problem. Did I go into science and end up doing computer simulations because that was information I would need to know so that I could write these books and understand this theory? It could have been that way rather than the other way. See, it may have been influenced in either direction. But however it is, I think it's kind of typical synchronicity that I happen to be in a field that helped me understand what it is I had to understand. Because these things, the idea that the consciousness system is information is the way science is going now, from Fredkin and the digital physics movement on. There's a lot of data and a lot of research that basically points to reality is digital and virtual. Okay, so I think if you get digital and virtual, you're talking about, you know, an information field. So the fact that if that's the case, and I don't think another metaphor would work, because that's really what the research is saying it is all about. It really is just information. All we do is process information. I look at you, light bounces off of you, it comes into my eyes, and it turns into electrical impulses. That's digital information. Then it turns into patterns of neurons. That's digital information. Our whole reality is nothing but digital information that then we interpret to be what we see. You see? So that's kind of clear that that's it. So it's not just that I'm kind of in a digital information field that I come up with that. That's kind of basic science, that is the way it is. Now the fact that I'm in the digital science makes it easier for me to see it, come up with those metaphors, you know, talk about how the virtual reality works. I find that I call them kids. You know, I'm 66 years old, so anybody younger than 50 is a kid. You know, so the kids who today have grown up playing virtual reality games, they get this very easily. I noticed that. Young people who have spent hours at the computer in World of Warcraft. My sons both play World of Warcraft. My daughters both play The Sims, girl game, boy game. But they put hours and hours in. I never played the games, but I watched them play them. Because if you were going to hang out with them, you had to sit there and watch them play them, because that's what they were doing. And so I saw, how they worked and what they were doing. And those kind of people who have spent those hours in virtual realities, they get this very easily. They see that. It doesn't take a whole lot before they go, oh, that makes sense to me. Yeah, we're in a virtual reality. We're interpreting data, because they've done that. Whereas old fogies like me, have a hard time getting that if they aren't in maybe digital science field. If you're not, if you don't do a lot of simulation, this may be like, well, that's weird. That doesn't make any sense. So I think it does help to be in this field. If I hadn't been in this field, I may not have been able to come up with those metaphors. So that was Einstein's problem. He said, okay, I know we got to get rid of mass, we got to get rid of space, we got to, all these things, they can't be continuous, they have to be digital. Nothing. See, nothing came up. It was like blank. What can we do? That's because that was 20, 30, 40 years before the first virtual reality ever was created. It just didn't have those concepts. So because I did have the concepts, it made it a lot easier. I don't think I ended up with reality being an information set because I happen to be in an information-intensive area, because I think that's just a fact. It's just like that. I don't think any other metaphor would work.
All right, 2 questions. One, the relationships that we have here, parent, child, wife, husband, soulmate, friends, etc. Do they have any meaning outside of PMR? And do we stay connected beyond this simulation? That's one. And the second is, the fears that you talk about, not the intellectual fears, but the deep down level fears that influence us somehow. Where do they come from?
Okay, the first question is, are we connected with our loved ones more fundamentally than just here in this reality frame? And the answer is, most of the time, no. Some of the time, yes. Okay, we talked just a little bit ago that you could be from the same oversoul, with your loved ones. You could be. You could have, if you were a more evolved consciousness, made plans to come here with your friends, people you had reincarnated with before, because you are good at helping each other grow. You're good at pulling things out of each other. You react well as a team, okay, rather than just people that you don't know. So sometimes those connections, your wife in this life, was your son. Before that, was your husband. After that, sort of thing. And you've had all sorts of relationships with each other. So that can happen sometimes, but most of the time, no. It's not that kind of a complex relationship situation. Most of the time, it's just entities who are incarnating into this. They find your family to be a good match for their needs. And at the lower levels of evolution, at the beginning levels, just hop in, hop out. All they want to do is gain experience. They're not at the point yet of analyzing that experience and figuring out what's best for them to do next. They just don't have much experience yet. And they don't care a whole lot where they end up. They just pop into whatever's available. The system kind of sends them around to appropriate places. So most of the time, that isn't it. And I know that rubs a lot of people the wrong way, because it's like, oh, it's my child, my lover, whatever, and we'll always be together forever now, and after that, and on and on and on. And that sentiment is very nice, but it generally doesn't work that way. So maybe this is a good opportunity to talk a little bit about what happens when you die. What happens when you die is that you change reality frames. You go from this virtual reality to another virtual reality. That other virtual reality is one that was designed just to help people make the transition from this reality to that other reality. It's a transition reality. It's made to make that transition easier and effective. Okay, why do you need the transition? Because people here have a lot of beliefs. They have a lot of attachments. So you die, you end up becoming aware in this other reality. Your past life that just ended, very shortly ago, is to you now just like a dream is when you wake up. You know how when you wake up from a dream and it's crystal clear, 3 minutes later you can hardly remember it, and 3 minutes after that, you barely know what happened? That's the way this life goes. So you kind of wake up, or you become aware in this alternate reality frame. Immediately, your whole life that you just lived is crystal clear. In a little bit, it's real foggy, and a little bit after that, it's mostly gone. Okay, so that's kind of the way it works. It's like a dream. It's like waking up from a dream. It's very similar to waking up from a dream. You go to this reality. The first thing that happens is, it depends. It's individual. It's not the same thing for everybody, but typically the first thing that happens is that you are kind of a little panicked. You don't know exactly what's going on. It's like you wake up from that dream, right? You wake up from the dream, you may really be in a panic because you just fell off a cliff or something happened. And people come out a little on the ragged side emotionally, and a little panicked, fearful. They don't know what's going on. Particularly, religious folks tend to be more fearful. And the first thing that has to be done is relax. It's all right. You're going to be okay. It's that kind of, soft talk, soft music, dim lights. You want to make it not scary. You want to make it comforting. That's done in many ways. Typically, it's done with meeting somebody that you feel familiar with. A child, a parent, somebody comes, somebody deceased, because that would make sense, right? And you spend a couple of minutes with them and you feel better and everything's all right. And somebody will tell you, go over there and stand in line, get in with this group because they'll tell you what to do next. And you're, of course, very obedient at that point. And you go over and you stand in line. Well, why are you standing in line? It's not because they have inefficient processes in this reality. It's basically, they are just biding time, letting you let go of that dream that you just had of that other life. So you have little busy work things to do. Go stand in this line, go talk with that group. Well, that person who's going to service that light isn't here yet. You're going to have to wait for a while. All of this is just giving you a little time to relax and let go, and the dream fades. So you get conned, if you will. You get handled like a child so that you are relaxed and not up in a whip over what just happened. So that's typically the way it goes. And then after a while, you get bored there. They just kind of let you hang out there. They may even give you a little course where somebody comes and talks to you. But mostly you're just waiting around, hanging out, expecting something to happen that never really happens until you get really bored. And then when you're bored, it's like, well, I'm bored here. What's happening? What's going on? I need to move on. And then when you get to that place where you're bored and ready to move on, somebody comes to help you move on. And they say, well, okay, what would you like to do? And you say, well, I don't know. What are the options? You say, well, let's see. You seem to have a really big problem with love, or you had a really big problem with anger management. You used to really fly off the handle. I think maybe we should work on that. I never had a problem on anger management. What are you talking about? It's just that everybody I dealt with, were real jerks. Wasn't my problem. And they say, well, let's look at that. Let's review that. And you basically start to see your life played back in front, except it jumps to these places where you were throwing fits and having anger management problems. And it's like, oh, yeah, well, I guess that did happen once, and then they show you 10 more, and then it's like, okay, anger management, I guess I had a little problem there after all. Well, let's pick something that'll give you an opportunity to deal with that anger. Because what that anger was your fear of being abused, say, or your fear of inadequacy turned out you expressed that as anger. So they talk about it a little, and you kind of set up a thing. And basically, you agree to it. You have free will. You can always say, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not ready to go back yet. All right, you can go wait. You'll get bored in a little while. You'll get even more bored than you are now. But it's that sort of thing. You work out a plan, the kind of thing that you kind of like to do. They kind of explain it to you. Say, look, here's the slot open right here. And I think that would work well for you. And you go, okay, because you don't know any better, right? So you say, sure, fine. There you go, you're back in it. Next thing you know, somebody's smacking your bottom and you're crying and you're starting all over, okay? So that's kind of the way it works. Now, it works differently for different people. If you come and you've already done this a lot and you really know what's going on and you come out after the death and you're either ready to go back again or you want a break or whatever, you don't go through the process. Nobody tells you to stand in line. You don't need all that hand-holding. You don't need all that comfort and soft music in order to, let go. You just process on. You just go on, get ready, go back again. Or if you're on the other end to where you're just beginning, you have that processing that relaxes you, but then it's not like, well, do you have an anger management problem? It's just like, you don't really talk about it at all. You just hop back in. All right, we got another place for you. Go. So it's hop out, hop in, and you're just going around making experience. It's not until you have a lot of experience that you can really tell where are your weak points, what are your strong points, what do you really need. Eventually, you've done this a lot, you'll have maybe some other entities that you work with. You've worked with them before, and that was a really productive lifetime for both of us. We really kind of pulled each other out on this learning thing. You really aggravated the hell out of me, and I learned from that. I grew. That's good. We're good together. And then you may want to try that again together. And it may not work next time, or it might. But if it does, then you might want to do that again. You see, so sometimes little groups or people kind of like to work together. But all that does is set up possibilities. You still have free will. And you may end up planning to work together, and it may just not work out. You may go two different ways. Things change. Somebody else makes a decision. So it doesn't happen. So a lot of it's random. Stuff just happens. Who you happen to bump into, what they do, how you react, what happens next. There's a very large random component. Your biology can be more or less random. Okay, so there's a lot of randomness in how all those chromosomes go together between the male and female to make another being, right? There's millions of ways that they can go together, billions of ways they can go together. That's why none of us are exactly alike. So how that works can be left entirely up to randomness. Doesn't matter. Look, your job is just to be here. Stuff happens, you deal with it, right? You can do that in any number of millions of configurations, so it really doesn't matter. Sometimes it does matter because it's something very particular that's at stake, something very particular that needs to be done. And then that uncertainty can be manipulated to give you just the particular thing that you want, particular lesson, set it up as a probability. So that's kind of what happens. That's the process of when you die. It's just a change. Your data stream changes from this one to a different one. Your body's gone away. It's already been uploaded. It's been uploaded all the time as you experienced it. You have to relax. You have to let go. Your loved ones, the ones that you were never going to leave and be with forever and ever, and death, death doesn't do you part. You stay on forever. Nice sentiment, but it hardly ever works that way. Now it can. You and another could kind of stay as a pair, as a couple, because you're really good for each other. Then that might work. So it's not that that's impossible. Almost anything's possible. Most of the time and now, it's not like that. That makes a lot of people unhappy when I say that, but that's just the way it is. Where I get my information from is two sets of experiences. One, I have watched innumerable people die and been with them all the way. In other words, you're with them in the physical body, and then as they die, you go with them in the outer body, and then you follow them on through the process. You're right there with them when they see Uncle Fred, and you go through that process. You can watch all the people standing in line. You can actually go there and participate. And the other, I've done that often enough. The other one is that, like any place else, if you stand around long enough, somebody will put you to work. And evidently I was hanging around often enough that I get a job working in that transition area for a while, and that was my job. So I was between jobs, I had a little free time, and I got placed in the job, and I had to work there in that processing center. So I saw a lot of people passing through, and some of the things I did there was just the normal, the normal kind of hand holding, and other times I was called on to help with particularly difficult transitions. Some are more difficult than others. Most are not terribly difficult. The ones that are terribly difficult are the ones where people come with a very strong obsession or attachment to something. Because see, you're just consciousness. If your consciousness is focused in a tiny little spot, sometimes that's suicide victims. Sometimes that's extremely religious people. Sometimes that is people that die under very harsh circumstances. And it just takes a little work before you can get them to relax and let go of the experience. That's like the nightmare that you have that doesn't just drift away, half a minute after you wake up. You still have that nightmare. You walk around with it for an hour or two, it's still hanging with you. Well, that's because you were so focused in it, and it was such an emotionally grabbing thing that it's hard to let go of. So people who come with a very strong attachment that way to something take a little more time and a little more hand-holding and sometimes a little special effort, a little special counseling before they forget and let go. And that's another area that you can work in. So that's where the information basically comes from, is my personal experience. And pardon? Okay, well, that was been a long time ago. Tell me that again.
Our deep down
Yeah.
fears that we have, where do they originate from?
Where do they originate from? Most of them come from your culture. Most of them. A lot of your fears, it's just the way people in your culture are. These are the things they fear. Just like a lot of your beliefs come from your culture. Some of them, yes, can come from past experience. That's a possibility, that fear gets carried over from a past experience. After all, that all gets uploaded right to the individuated unit of consciousness, and that's all a part of that experience. So if it's something particularly grabbing, then it can come from a past life experience. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time you let that dream dissipate. Sometimes that dream still nags you. Well, yes, you say if you get in one culture rather than another, right, you kind of pick your fears and your beliefs. Yeah, a lot of them are just cultural. Some of them are humanity-wide, but a lot of them are just culture. There are some cultures where the fear of death is very weak. Some cultures where the fear of death is very strong. It depends. Left brain cultures, it tends to be stronger. So we're a very left brain culture now, so we have a lot of fears as far as process goes. Right brain cultures don't have that. The forgetfulness, why is it when you're born you have to start over with your mind? Well, it's a practical consideration. The reason that you have to start over and forget everything is that it would just be impossibly complicated and difficult if you didn't forget. Okay, let's say that here you are now, and in your past lives, you have had 600 spouses, 1,200 children, 300 lovers, all of these people, all just very special and dear to your heart. And maybe of all those, maybe 400 or 500 of them had very strong emotional attachments and connections, and whether it was that you fought all the time or whether it was that you were just soulmates, you have all of this connection going on. So here's all these loved ones, all these connections, all these emotional happenings. There's places where you were beaten to death. There was places where you were raped and pillaged, and places where all kinds of things happened to you. Now you have all this. You remember every bit of it. How can you deal with that emotionally? You see? You couldn't. You couldn't deal with the 20 or 30 or 40,000 people that you were intimately involved with in all of these lifetimes, neighbors, people, friends of the family, cousins, uncles, and so on. All of this now, you remember every single one of them, and every child and every husband and wife, and they all are current in your mind. That would be impossible. That would drive you nuts. There would be so much chatter and clatter and noise that you wouldn't be able to focus and operate in this reality. So you don't have them there. They're gone. And you don't want them there because you don't want to keep reliving the past. That's the second thing. You don't want to keep reliving the past. The reason that you stop and start again, why do you have all these cycles? Why not just have one incarnation that lasts, 2,000 years? Why do it in these little pieces? Well, because what happens is you work yourself into corners. People do. Belief corners. They get themselves into a set of beliefs, and by the time they're 50, 60 years old or 40 years old, they've been there, done that. They've got their beliefs fixed, and it's very hard to show them anything else because this is just the way it is. It's what they learned from their parents. It's what they got at church. It's what they whatever, and here's their beliefs, and that's it. Trying to grow up from there is hard. You paint yourself in a corner. You get stuck in a belief trap or a lot of belief traps. What's the best way to deal with that? Off with their head, right? Start again. You get a new start. You get a new attitude. You get a new set of experiences. You no longer have to deal with the fact that somebody beat you every day of your life when you were, between the ages of 8 and 12. That's gone now. Let it go. So that's why you start over. That's why you have to forget. It's a much better strategy to grow up, that you start over with a new slate. You get to start fresh again with an open mind. Children are wonderfully open-minded. That's why they call fat people fat. They don't know any better, you see. They're so open